All right, so we're going to look at how to draw some lines and use constraints within Fusion 360. So I've selected sketch and I've selected one of the planes to do the sketch on. And now I'm going to select line, which I can do right here, or I can select it from the create menu or by just pressing L. And off to the side, not over the center of the origin, I'm going to just click and drag and make 4 straight lines, none with right angles, just an odd shape here, nothing parallel. And I'm going to close it right there. So now we have our 4-sided shape. And what I'm ready to do now is start looking at how constraints work within Fusion 360. Well, we're going to slowly make this into a square. Starting with the parallel constraint, we're going to make this side and this side parallel. And now it's a trapezoid. And now we'll make the other 2 sides parallel. And now we have a parallelogram. So you can see no matter what we do or to change dimensions on this, it's always going to be a parallelogram given the constraints that we put in. We could always, to get it close to a square, we're going to make some of the corners perpendicular. There we go. So now those two are perpendicular and we're at a rectangle. If I were to try to make a couple of the other ones perpendicular, it would say you're over constrained. Like this corner already has to be perpendicular 90 degrees, so putting that constraint on there over constrains the model. And now to make it into a square, we can use this equal constraint and just pick 2 next door sides, and now we have a square. If we want it to be vertical or horizontal to the Cartesian plane, we can choose the vertical horizontal and choose any line, and it'll snap it to looking just like this, like a nice square that's regular against the Cartesian plane. So it's typically best practice to constrain things first and then put dimensions on. Under dimensions, we can find sketch dimension down under the create menu. We can also use the shortcut D or click on it right here. And the first dimension I'm going to put on is the vertical dimension. Looks like it's a little over 10.2 centimeters. Let's just make it an even 10. Now I'm going to put a second dimension on. I'll press the D, and I'm going to do the other dimension for the square. I come up and I press it, and it says this is over constrained, but we could create a driven dimension instead. Okay, so it makes this dimension, it puts it in parentheses, and what that means is it is 10 centimeters, but it is driven by other constraints and dimensions. In that case, that the vertical has to be 10 centimeters and that these 2 sides have to be equal to each other, completely constrains this horizontal dimension. So if I were to select, however, the equal constraint, I got the line instead there. Now I've selected the equal constraint, it looks like, and delete it. Now, if I were to right-click on the driven dimension, I can make it a driving dimension. And so now it's a dimension that can drive the shape of the model. And if I were to change these dimensions, say that one to 5, it becomes a rectangle, or I can change this one here to 5, it becomes a different shaped rectangle. Now, let me show you a different way if we did want to constrain this to be a square, other than putting an equal constraint, and that would be under the Modify menu and Change Parameters. And we're going to need to expand out this for Sketch 3. In my case, these are called dimensions D3 and D4. Yours might be D1 and D2, or whatever it might be, D7 and D8. It's just automatically generated variable names by Fusion. And these are 10 centimeters and 10 centimeters each. I could change one to 15 centimeters and hit OK, and you can see it changes on the model. Another cool thing I could do in order to, in this case, essentially put in a constraint is enter in the variable name D3. And when I do that, it's going to say this dimension is a function. It's determined by a function of other things in the model. In this case, it's a function simply of the other dimension, the vertical dimension, and they are equal to each other. Exactly the same as an equality constraint, but I could do more flexible things here. I could say that I always want the horizontal dimension to be twice the size of the vertical dimension. And now if I were to change the vertical dimension, you can see it's going to keep that same aspect ratio. All right, so now before we finish the sketch, I am going to go to Modify and Move just to get this rectangle out of the way. What am I going to select? I want to select all four sides. And then we're going to move it in this direction. And that should be enough to have it out of the way. Hit Return and finish the sketch. Hit the home so we can see it, and then maybe zoom back out just a little bit.